Hello guys, and welcome to this new video with TheChessWorld.com, and we are today with the 7th round of the Sinquefield Cup 2015 with two game features today with the leaders. So we have Nakamura playing against Aronian as the first game. So Hikaru is facing Aronian, which is leading, and he's tying the lead with Magnus Carlsen, which is going to play white, which play white against Alexander Grischuk. So we are going to follow those two games, and we start with Hikaru against Levon. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6. So we have a new Ruy Lopez. Bishop a4, knight f6, attacking the center. Castle, bishop e7, rook e1. All that is old, well-known theory. Bishop b3, castle a4, attacking the pawn. Pawn to b4, so the pawn structure slightly worse after the move a4 for black, but it's nothing special. This pawn on b4 is not that bad. He's looking at c3, so I mean it's all theory. d4, d6, so contending for the center, a bit like in a Philidor, by the way, when you go d4, d6. So black is sitting tight, and here the first little stop, Hikaru is taking pretty strange decision to me. He's taking the pawn. I mean, there are a lot of theory here, a lot of moves are playable, but he's taking the pawn. I mean, the choice of the variation generally is strange. Going into this endgame, knowing that Aronian is a very experienced player in this position. Nakamura himself played that in the past, and Carlsen as well. I mean, it's not the best hour of the game for Nakamura, and you will see what happens. But he didn't show up with a novelty even or a good move. So, strange decision. So knight bd2. So developing the knight toward the c4 square or f1 e3. So both are available. Pawn to h6. This is still theoretical, so always a good move because you cover the g5 square or against the bishop, or sometimes the knight also, which could connect with this bishop for the pawn f8, and giving an hideaway for the king. It's always good in the endgame because at some point you always got to play a move with the king or with the pawn. Bishop to c4. So the knight now is maybe landing on b3. Though I don't like to have the knight on b3, but in this turn position with the strange pawn structure, it might be important to control those two squares, c5 and a5. So bishop c4, also the bishop is better on this diagonal now that the move h6 was played. Nothing is happening on f7, and it's better to have a look at a6. So a logical move, and black goes bishop d6. So we are still in the theory, we are still following a lot of games. Yes, bishop d6. Yeah, so we are even following a game between Koryakin and Aronian. We're following a lot of Aronian games still. Pawn to a5. So this is still theoretical as well. So he wants to make this b4 pawn more weak, but the a5 pawn might be a problem at some point, because the a6 pawn can't protect the b4 pawn anymore, and the b2 pawn can't protect the a5 pawn. So we have two lonely pawns on this position. So both players going to try to take advantage. Black goes rook e8. So he wants to free the piece from this pawn. He played the king f8 was the continuation of a game against Koryakin. From a human point of view, it makes more sense, but Aronian is so experienced that we will trust him that the protection of this pawn is important. The thing here is that the move that was supposed to be the best in this position was played in a game between Nagy and Sargsyan, and it's the move b3. Bringing the bishop to b2, so adding a pressure on e5 and bringing the knight to better squares later on in the game. so b3 makes sense because I mean, if your bishop can land on b2, I mean, I would just play some nonsense move. Okay, if your bishop can land on b2 and your knight on c4, like the knight protects a5 and attacks the pawn on e5, this bishop is looking at the pawn a6, so it might be a good way to put your pieces together with white, with this pawn on b3, the bishop on b2. Remind me of a game between Gulko and Rajabov as well. This idea with b3, bishop b2. So rook e8, bishop to d3. So this is the novelty that Nakamura come up with, and it was met. So Aronian starts to think, and it was met by a very logical replacement of a piece. Can you find that? Can you find which piece we could change position and even earn a tempo on this bishop? This is a big hint. So black goes here knight d7. And the thing is that black anyway wants to go to c5 because it attacks the pawn, and now we even win a tempo on this bishop. So it's like pointing that this move was a loss of time. So now white goes b3, knight c5, and bishop to c4. So maybe looking toward d5 now, but bishop e6. So that's maybe the idea now that the knight disappeared from f6. He wanted to go to d5, but I mean, I'm not that impressed. Bishop b2, looking at the pawn e5, pawn to f6, bishop takes f6, bishop takes e6, and rook takes c6. So white could exchange its bad bishop against the good bishop. Black did consolidate its center against this bishop on b2, so somehow the bishop on b2 is the good bishop, but in the endgames, sometimes the space advantage is more important because it gives more square to the bishop, and this bishop, because of this slight space advantage for black, is not dramatically bad compared to the bishop b2, because black is really ready to meet this bishop. So it's pretty much okay, and it still has a good square to go on c5. So this minor piece disadvantage is not that important here. The light square might be a bit weak for black, and if white has time to bring a knight on it, on those squares, could be good for white. But still we are close to equality here. I even think we have an equality. And with the dynamic of the last moves, I do prefer black here, because of the dynamic of the game. So knight to c4, bringing the knight on the good square. Black goes rook b8, knight fd2. So it doesn't really care to lose this somehow bad bishop. Also, we could retake it with the rook, seizing the open file, so it's okay. And rook to b5. A very good plan was played by Levon. Rook b8, rook b5, attacking this pawn on a5. And I've been talking about the fact that those two pawns are the weakness for both sides. And now black is attacking this pawn and could even come with the knight on b7 to attack it a third time. So he might attack the pawn 3 times and defend its pawn 2 times with the same pieces, even 3 times if we count the bishop, while white has all troubles to defend the a5 pawn. So he deals with that. Now Hikaru is going to play passively with rook a1 and rook to with rook e2 and rook a2 and rook a1. He could have tried better to play some knight f1, knight b7, knight e3, trying to look toward those light squares. And the thing now is that black cannot retake the pawn immediately, because if you take, rook a1 and you lose the pawn, and if you go knight take a5 here, while it's just bringing the rook to d1, and I mean, when the bishop leaves now, we can bring the rook to d7. it's looking okay for white. Also, if black would try after knight f1, knight b7, knight f3 to bring the bishop backward in order to protect this pawn with the rook, white can always play knight d5, attacking the pawn on c7, and it's unclear how you defend it. So you never have time to take this pawn on a5. So this was an active way to defend the position. White went rook a2, knight b7 and rook ea1, and now those two rooks are looking so bad, especially the one on a2, which is totally blocked on a2, while black has time to maneuver, try to bring rooks on the d file. So black goes here, bishop c5. So now this knight is well placed, and this knight is well placed, so we can seize the c5 square with the bishop. King f1, rook e7. So going to the d file, king e2, rook d7 now. So took the control of the open file, knight f1, and bishop d4. So we need to bring a knight to d4 or a piece to d4, a knight, but we don't want to give up the knight against the bishop because the knights are good. The position is pretty close, and the knights are doing good. So we prefer to trade our bad bishop. Knight f3, bishop takes e3 now. If you want to trade pieces, you better trade against the knight. Knight is stronger here. King takes e3, and king f7. So as you see, black now has two knights, again a bishop and the knight, and in this particular endgame the knight is slightly stronger because as I just said, the position is closed and there were more squares where the knight could land. A simple example, just playing the move with white, is that after knight d4 check, you would be really happy to exchange this bishop against the knight. That's sometimes a little hint, a little rule you can use, is that if the knight, if the bishop is really happy and you can visually see that to exchange against the bishop, it means that the knight, at least for the moment, is better than the bishop. This is a little tip you can use to make it simpler. So pawn to f3, king e6. So black now maybe looks to some plans with g6, f5 to kick the knight away and put pressure on those light squares. Because if we could trade those f pawns, imagine the f pawns are out of the equation. This pawn on e4 now would be weak, and we could go like knight c5 and switch the play against this pawn, as white doesn't have any light square bishop. So king e6 preparing for some plan, and maybe prematurely white is entering by pawn to g4. So he wants to stop all the play with his pawn, but it's weakening the f3 pawn. In some future variation, the pawn might be weak. Also, the square on f4 is getting weak as well. So it's giving up squares. Always remember, when you push a pawn, it cannot come backward. That's why you are weakening squares. So every time you push a pawn, you should really be aware of that. So black goes now knight c5, switching the play. Knight c4, king e7. So he's bringing the knight to this square. Bishop c1, knight to e6. So we have the g5 square and eventually the d4 square as well. Bishop e3, knight d4, king to f2, knight to g5. So he could have taken the knight. This was a decent move as well. I mean, black is better, but it's always close to, I mean, not to be a draw, but it's a close position. It's always hard to win with black. So you can take with the bishop and try to defend like that. Just the decision that black took, that white took, was not really ideal. So maybe rook takes d4 and coming with the knight to f4. It's or to g5. So we're keeping both options. So yeah, black is better. You might try to take the d file as well, but it's still very unclear if you can really make progress here. It's surely suffering for white, but not clear if you can win those positions with black with a perfect play. I mean, with a perfect play, you surely can't win, but it's interesting if Nakamura could have defended that, because after king f2, knight to g5. Again, I think he has to take the knight on d4 for the same reason, but because knight bishop g5, and here, can you tell me how you retake this bishop? Let you think about that. In fact, both moves are good. You can take either with the h pawn and try to harass the h2 pawn, but it will be defended by the king. And you can then replace the knight somewhere. You could try to make some play against the h pawn like that, or you could take, as he played in the game, f take g5, a very unnatural move to make an isolated pawn here and to take a central pawn to go to the side. But the thing is that the play on the f file is really obvious because we have this knight on d4, which is a monster attacking the pawn, and it's really quick to bring her pieces over there. So everybody is ready to attack that. White goes rook d1, king e6, so freeing the path and protecting the pawn. It's a good square for the king. Rook d3, rook f7, rook a1. So everybody is going to the f file. You see a lot of movement. And the thing is that this knight, when it attacks f3, it attacks also c2. Another important thing I didn't pointed. And here, white is playing a very strange move. It's 39 move, and maybe it's because of the Zeitnot, maybe it's because of tiredness. But a very logical move here is rook f1, rook f8. Remember, you never can take the pawn because of rook d5. Didn't point that out still, but that the idea is that the pawn on e5 is weak now, and you cannot let him enter on d5. So rook fb8, king g3, and I mean, it's not clear how black can make a difference now, because you can never take the pawn because of rook d5, repeating myself. And if you go to move c6, you don't quite solve your problems, because after knight c2 now it's met by rook d6 check. So black is applying some pressure here, but still close to a draw. White is sitting tight on his 3 ranks, and unclear how you could beat him. But he goes rook a d1, and now black just go rook bf8, and you have to lose the pawn now. You cannot protect it anymore. So I mean, just give up a pawn with a very strange move, rook d1. His idea was knight e5. I mean, that's what he played. Could have tried better knight d2, knight takes c2, rook c1, and knight d4. Would have been a better way to try to defend. But I mean, you just gave with the move rook d1 here the c2 pawn for free, and now this knight is still attacking those 2 very good spots. So I believe black is now possible. It's now winning, and with a good technique, Aronian might have, would have done the job. So he goes knight takes e5, king takes e5, rook takes d4, and rook takes f3. So for the moment we exchanged pawns, but the thing is that the rooks are getting in. So king e2, rook f2, check. So now if you go king e3, I hope you spot the checkmate in 1. Rook f3. So king e1, rook f1 check, king e2, rook to f2 check. So we're changing, we're like that, maneuvering with the rooks, so that we could bring 1 rook on f3 and 1 on f2. We had to give a few checks. So it's just I'm showing to you again this maneuver. So first is rook f2. Then you don't want to take this pawn now because you would love to have this rook here. So you give a check. He has no time to play king d2 if he wants to hide away. You take on d1 and take on d4. So no time, he has to play king e2, rook f2. He cannot go to d3 because of the rook. King e3, rook f3, king e2, rook f2, king e1. And so we achieve the same position with the rook on f3, which is much better than the rook on f8. Now take the pawn, rook d5 check, king f4. So marching toward g4 pawn. If we would, I'm not sure, maybe we could even have taken the pawn, but king f4 is so strong. Rook 1 d4, so he's trying to give checks. But king g4, rook c5, rook g3, turning the checkmate, king f1, and rook to c3. And here white just resigned because he's 2 pawns down. He pretty much has to take this rook, take. He's going to lose even a third pawn. I mean, the king is blocked on the first rank, and we have those 3 passed pawns here. It's just too easy for black to win this one. So white just resigned, and I have to say a very bad game by Hikaru in this endgame. It seems he didn't really understand the plans. I just want to come back to the key moment here. I mean, he just, first of all, just coming back, he committed. Sorry, I'm just searching for the move. Yeah, he first of all committed his rook to a1 and a2 instead of playing actively. So that was the first moment. And the second moment is when here he took the strange decision. I mean, everybody was going... wow. Some difficulty with chess base, sorry. When everybody was going toward the f3 pawn, just decided to give it away with rook a1. So 2 big mistakes. It's certainly not the type of games of type of position where he plays good, and so strange, really strange choice of opening here. Let's go to the next game between Magnus Carlsen, so the other leader, which had to win to keep with the pace of Levon, which is really reborn in this tournament. Just reset the system. And he's playing its best chess again. So Magnus had to beat Alexander Grischuk. He has the white pieces. So Grischuk decides to go to a Najdorf. So Magnus played bishop e3 earlier in the tournament against Wesley. So this time he's playing bishop e2, pawn e5, knight b3, bishop e7. All that is theoretical. Bishop e3, bishop e6. And queen d3. So it's a line that was played by Anand against Vashil Agrav earlier in the tournament. So we still keep the 2 addresses for the king. The king might go both ways. Also now when we play knight d5, if knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, or even if bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, the queen might be well placed already looking at this diagonal. So it's a 2-in-1 move. Also, we are preparing rook to d1 in order to take control of the d file. So the queen is pretty well placed. So knight b d7, knight d5, castle, bishop takes. All that is theoretical. E-pawn stake. So now we are getting this queen on the right diagonal. Also, the knight cannot land on c5 to win a tempo on the queen because this knight on b3 is well placed. Rook c8. And now we have a pawn structure where white has a majority on the queen side and black has a majority on the king side. So black is doing better here. White is doing better here. So white is going to try to push the pawns on the queen side, while white is going to push on the queen side, and black is going to push on the king side. It's not that easy. I mean, it's not like just nonsense pushing, but I mean the play of black is more on the king side, of course. So white starts with c4, very logical move to seize some space, and very typical one. Also, you protect your pawn, and you would love to follow up with b4 pretty soon, and somehow bring a pawn to c5. That would be the winning idea, but it's really hard to realize. Black goes 98, so he's preparing maybe for f5 even, probably. Queen to d2. Now the queen is looking toward the a5 square. Often when you have a majority on the queen side, you love to exchange the queens. So you move queen d2. He's really looking to do that. And also, maybe we might come on b4. Look at the b6 pawn, because black is playing b6 just to stop this idea. And maybe this queen might come into some dark squares on the queen side. But Carlsen said that he didn't like this position here, even if I don't see white has any problems. So, but I mean, sometimes you just don't like the position you play. It just didn't fit you somehow, and you don't feel comfortable. That happens many times. So white is playing rook ac1, so bringing the rook on the file where there is this display. I mean, this idea of c5 and this pawn that must be protected. And black goes a5. What about this move a5? Black could have tried to play f5, continue its idea. White might have entered either with f3, either with f4. It looks more direct and more, how to say, it's more a move like I would have played, maybe like it's just more direct. But he plays a5, and he's trying somehow to close up the queen side with the pawn on the dark square. So he's really keeping the dark squares. He has the bishop even behind, and he's really, how to say, taking a strong control of the dark squares. And it's not easy to use the light squares on the queen side, because you have any way to push those pawns like that. And it's not easy. Only a maneuver like bishop d1, bishop a4 could take advantage. But it's not easy to realize that right now. And Carlsen is going to play a very strong move, knight a1. So the knight is looking really clumsy. He's on the square every teacher would tell you, and I would say my pupil, what is your knight doing on a1? What's that? But it's minus Carlsen, so you have to take a good look. And the thing is that its idea is simple. You play b4. So you attack this pawn chain. And when the pawn is taking you on b4, look at that. Knight c2, knight takes b4, knight c6. 1, 2, 3, and my knight is on the best square on the board. So knight a1 is a very good move, allowing to push the pawn to continue the attack and bringing the knight through a long journey to go to c6. So a very deep move. Here Grischuk is playing j6. He could have played f5, of course, but he decided to go with the plan g6, knight g7, and knight f5. So that's why a move like bishop h6 doesn't make sense at all, because anyway knight g7 will be played, and now f5, f4 is even getting stronger. So sometimes I know that well-rated players are just invited by those moves, but it's a huge mistake. So white goes b4, continuing the plan. And of course, Alexander is not taking the pawn, because if you take the pawn, knight c2, and as I said, the knight is in 2 moves on the c6 square, and you are in deep troubles. So Grischuk continues its plan, knight g7, looking toward f5. Pawn takes, bishop to d3 now, stopping the knight. Knight to c5, we attack the bishop. Bishop to c2, so we replace the bishop to stop the knight from coming to f5. Pawn to a4, with the good idea to say, hey, your knight is on a1, it's not going to be exchanged against the c5 knight, my friend. Your knight is totally blocked here. So you have to find a solution with this piece. White goes rook b1, and he says, I'm taking the open file, so I mean, for the moment I'm doing okay. My knight is on a1, but the pieces are well placed. Like the bishop is looking at the pawn, it's protecting this square. This bishop on c5 can always be exchanged against the knight. It's a good thing, and it's always protecting also the g5 square. So this guy can't play bishop g5. So it's not easy for for black to play, and he changes the position and the pawn structure by going e4. So he was a bit paralyzed, and he plays actively, he pushes his pawn, and now his threat is simple. I mean, he wants to go f5 next. It's not a threat, he just wants to go f5 next, but for that he's giving up a pawn. So I mean, now he takes, as I said, we have a choice, and those two pawns are available now. Unfortunately, Magnus Carlsen misses queen to e2, which was the best move. He played bishop a4, we'll go back to that. So he's protecting its pawn. Don't forget there is a fork. So black could play f5 if he wants, met by bishop a4, and he has some good activity on the king side, but he gave up a pawn. So white has clumsy pieces. I think that's what he would have played. Just give up the pawn and get strong play on the king side. Or he could play, if he wanted to keep the pawn, he could play queen c7, which is now met by bishop a4, rook c4, and bishop to c6. And somehow this rook is really clumsy, being attacked by the white pieces. If you go rook c5, it's knight b3 immediately. And if you go like rook c3, I mean, maybe you lose the pawn even, which is awful. And the knight is coming away very quickly. So white was here much better. So rook b7 is coming. So he could not keep the pawn. He would have to play this f5 move and bishop a4 with an interesting game, but it was better than what happened for white. He went bishop takes a4 instead. Now rook takes c4, bishop c6, and knight f5. And look at the difference. In the last one, we had the queen. We had the queen on e2 and the queen on c7. So we had a very strong threat with white. Now, instead of queen c7, black can play this knight on f5, and it means it controls now the d4 square for the rook, and maybe has some threat with bishop g5, e3 coming. So queen e2 anyway, rook c3, queen takes e4, and rook a3. And now we are strengthening the a2 pawn, and we have, again, I just want to say that this knight is so much better than this queen on c7. Look, it's protecting the bishop. It's a very important tempo that white won. So queen to e2 back, bishop f6. So taking control of the b2 square. So that white can't protect by rook b2, sorry. Knight b3, queen e7, queen takes, knight takes. And now white has no possibility to defend this pawn. So black is regaining material. Knight to d2, rook a2, and knight c4. So replacing the knight to the better square. Took the time. Rook d8, protecting the pawn. And here, after a move like, well, by example, it could be rook fd1. The position is pretty equal. I mean, it's a 4 pawns against 4 pawns. Opposite colored bishop. Nobody has an edge. I mean, this rook is on a2. It's maybe slightly better than the white rook, but on the next move you play rook b7. And everything is okay with your rook as well. I mean, I don't see either player winning that. It's really going to be a peaceful draw. But Magnus played the move g4, which is somehow fashionable in the Sinquefield Cup. And the thing with this pawn on g4 is that you allow black to play a very strong play with this bishop. You permit black to upgrade the bishop. Can you find how? It's a very typical plan. That's why I'm so shocked Magnus allowed that, because it's really the first thing that comes to your mind. I hope. At least the first thing that came to my mind. So it's to bring the bishop to d4. And now after rook d1, bishop c5. And look at that. Now the rook connects with the bishop on the c2 pawn. And we saw that in a few games, even if in the game between Carlsen and So, somehow we had some connections like that. And now this bishop looks very, very stupid compared to the bishop on c5. So we have now a good bishop, I mean, a bishop on a good square against a bishop on a bad square, and it's really hard to understand how to recycle this one. So the bishop on c5, rook on a2. So now we go rook d2, take, knight c6, pawn c6, and rook c8. So white had to give up a pawn. He had no choice, in fact, from this position, because if you would play a move with the bishop, like bishop, if you would go like bishop b5, if you want to go away, it would just be made by rook b8 probably, and I mean, let's say you want to leave, but you're getting harassed everywhere with the rook landing on b2 very soon. Not talking about maybe better moves that I just didn't mention, but I mean, it's impossible to get the bishop away. So he's trading rooks, and he give up the pawn. Rook takes c6, rook d1. So it's a pawn up from Grischuk with the black pieces, but it's hard to convert. The thing is that, well, in many lines it's a 4 against 3. So here the only thing is that if you take the bishop, it takes with the pawn, and this c pawn is being pushed, so it's good for black. But in many positions, if we could just exchange the knight against the bishop like that, it would be a draw. I mean, if the rook has time to come, but the thing, I mean, it would not be a draw; it'd be close to a draw. But the thing is that you cannot retake the bishop. And the second problem is that these knights love to have square where they can stay, and knight doesn't have a square in the center where it can really we just can stay. Maybe white could have tried here knight f6 and knight d5, maybe bringing this knight to d5, but I believe there are some problems with the pawn f2. With the rook coming on a2. So he's going rook d1, black goes pawn h6, doesn't want to be fixed, pawn h4, king f8, king g2, king e7, rook c1, rook c8. So the endgame isn't pleasant, but I mean, it's surely drawish. It's just you will be tortured for a long time with white, but you can surely bring this to a draw. So king f3, king e6. So both players are just improving their pieces for the moment. Rook c2, so bringing the rook on the best square. So everybody's on light squares. Rook c7, just avoiding in some lines, allowing bishop b6, protecting the rook, and pawn to h5. It's maybe a bit too early to play such a committal move. In the endgame where when you are slightly worse, it's good to wait. Just try not to move anything. Just try to keep things simple. Maybe you could have tried, I don't know, just saying maybe rook e2. I mean, just some waiting moves, then rook c2 back, and just wait for your opponent to move, to start something. Not provoke the play, but wait for it. Things that psychologically, I mean, it's really easy to say when you look at the game. Things that psychologically your opponent is thinking the same thing. I mean, with black, Grischuk is thinking now, I can play this for like 100 moves. I'm not in a hurry. Let's just stay like that, play some little moves. He doesn't know if I really have a threat or if I just move like that, because always when you are with white in those type of positions, you think, is this move the start of a long idea? Maybe you want to play f5 now. Maybe you want to play d5. Maybe you want to bring the bishop to b6. And you are always like having to be aware of everything. While black can just play. I mean, he knows that white can't do anything anyway, so he can just play a move. And his opponent has to extrapolate and think maybe this is genius, maybe this is some crazy ideas. And black is just not even thinking, he's just sitting, drinking a coffee, and having time to find, to wait for the time where he will start his attack. So here the move h5 is a bit committal, and it's probably not a good move. but psychologically he wants to provoke the game to, to go on, so that something happens. So bishop b6. If you go to this endgame, it's a pretty hard one to defend because the knight, as we said, is going to be kicked away, and it's not easy to get good squares for this knight. And of course, if the knight and the bishop are exchanged, I don't know, let's imagine some nonsense. Just total nonsense. Of course, all those endgames are easily won. So the knight against bishop endgame are always hard to draw when you are a pawn down. So that's why he waits. Rook e2, bishop d4. There are no good checks for white here, unfortunately. King g3, pawn to d5, knight d2, king to f5. So black is taking some space now, and again this knight has a hard time. King g2, bishop e5. So keeping a lot of squares with those guys. Knight f3, bishop f6. So the knight found a pretty much good square, but now it's controlled by the bishop. You will often see a bishop controlling a knight like that. I mean, the bishop has the edge. It has a good square, so the harmony between the black pieces is better. Rook a2, rook d7, knight e1, rook c7, king f3, bishop g5. So never forget that this pawn on h5 might be weak at some point, but white is not worried for the moment of losing it. For the moment, it's still okay. Rook a5, rook king e5, because this pawn has to be protected as well. King e2. So he's bringing the king back toward the center. Maybe it's running some knight f3 check now. Sorry. King e4, rook a4 check, d4. So black is still improving its position, but this is going to be hard now to push the pawn, because the pawn is on the dark square and the next one is a light square, so the bishop can't help you. That's why you need to use this h5 weakness in order to win the game. Never forget this rule. You need two weaknesses in order to win a chess game, and that's why this pawn on h5 is in trouble many times. So pawn to f3 check, king d5, rook a5, king c4, and knight d3. So I went to this position because both players in the last 10 moves, I mean, black made some slow progress, but it was hard for white anyway to stop that. So I just went through this position, and here I'm a bit surprised Carlsen didn't go with a check, king b4, so forcing the king over there, rook a6 back, rook e7 by example, and king d1. I think that's what he was afraid of, but let's say king b5. So after king c4 here, we could give the check again, and when you go to d5, it's another check, and you cannot progress through e4. So if you go backward, now black can probably go knight c2. So king b4, king b5, attacking the rook, rook d6, and king c5, rook a6. And I didn't really see how Grischuk was going to improve its position here against all those checks. Maybe he's going to try to bring the rook over there, but then the king goes back to e2. It wasn't clear for me why he didn't go with this check, because it looks to me obvious trying to keep checking this king. He went instead knight d3, rook e7 and rook e5. So he wanted to go to this endgame now, and maybe he was right, just he switched the play. Knight e3 is pretty much a commitment to exchange the rooks, because if black doesn't do that, what is he doing? If you move your rook on b7, now it's rook c5 check, and your king is carried away, and this is looking okay for white. At least it's an improvement for white to cut the king away. So with this knight e3 is forcing to exchange the rooks, but okay, so rook e6 here. First of all, king c6 according to Komodo is winning, because now we don't have rook c5, and it's going to look a bit like in the game, so I won't go in the variation, but now we have to exchange those rooks, and when the king lands on c3, then it lands on c2, and it's hard for white to play. There was some kind of zugzwang coming, but anyway, we'll see that in the game. Just to say, the rook e6 logical move played by Grischuk. So the idea is now when you take, the pawn is slightly improving, coming to e6, so it's a better square for this pawn. So white goes f4. Also, I don't like this move because it commits your pawn to a dark square. Bishop f6, rook e6, pawn e6. And here, somehow, it seems that king d2, even after all that I said, is just holding the game. Because after king d5, king e2, I mean, after king d2, so the idea it would be to come back to this pawn. So king d2, king d2, sorry. So the move that will play is knight f2. But after king d2, knight, king d5, here king e2, king e4, and knight c5 is the idea that hold the game. King f4, knight e6, king g4, knight takes, bishop takes, and bishop f1, and this endgame must be a draw. I mean, white could try some ideas with king h3 to kick the king away, but the pawn is too far. If it was on h3, it would be another story. But like that, the pawn is too far, and I believe this is a draw. You cannot bring this king too far and have time to hit the pawn. So this game was a draw. And see, after king d2 is that if this is the only idea to win the game, I mean king d5, king e2, and if you go like bishop e7, preparing king e4, he goes king f3, and now after king c4 he has king e4. And this seems to hold, to be just holding for white. Though it should be analyzed still, but this was the correct idea to do the job. So f e6, he goes knight f2, and now bishop e7. So he's preparing king to c3, knight g4. So now after king d2, bishop d6, attacking the pawn, knight d3, king d5, king e2, and king e4. And you don't have this knight c5 check anymore, so we are going to win the pawn on the next move. So you see, we had time to play this maneuver. So bishop e7, so he goes knight g4, he's going to, for the pawn, king c3, f5, but anyway it's winning. If you go king d1, bishop f8, king f2, d3, so now the pawn was even pushed further, king g4, knight g4, king d4, king d2, and bishop d6, winning the pawn. Just an example, but you have no way to keep those pawns with white. It's impossible. When the pawn is on d3, it's just too far away. And if you go, instead of f5, knight f2, it's made by king c2, knight d3. So trying this setup. Guys protecting each other, but bishop a3, knight f2, bishop d6. So attacking the pawn, knight d3 is forced, and king c3. And you cannot move any piece. The king is committed to the knight is committed to the pawn, and nothing can move. So this is also losing for white. So king c3 coming back to the game, pawn to f5, pawn to f5, knight to h6, and king to c2, driving the pawn till the end zone. So Magnus had a very strange game again for his standard. I mean, he was in this end game. He really didn't play good. He was not patient. He could not defend patiently. It's really interesting to see that when he is better in the end game, usually in drawn end game, he's taking the full point all the time. And here we saw him in a bad end game, and it was really hard for him just to defend calmly. He played a lot of committal move, like the move h5, trading the rooks, and then when he was so close to hold the draw, still he was how to say, he was falling very slowly. I mean, Black was improving the position, was playing good, but Carlsen was still able to hold the draw, and at last I mean, it's not a blunder, but even did the mistake. So it means he just slowly lost this endgame without putting up a great fight as we would wait from the world champion. I'm thinking that maybe he has some motivation issues. Maybe we could remember the post he had on Facebook to change the format of the world crown, the world title. Even if it's not Fitz advantage, if everybody is playing all the time in a cup system or in any other system. But it seems that he's the world champion of classical chess, he's the world champion of blitz, he's the world champion of rapid, he defended the world chess champion title, and it seems he has some struggle with motivation now, and we could feel that in the game. He's not the fighter we used to know, and he's just losing those games too easily, and he's not applying as much pressure as he did before. He was lucky against Caruana to win the game early in the tournament, so he's still on +1, but he was lucky in some games, and he didn't quite play the level we knew were when he was 28-72 and just crushing everybody. It's not the case anymore. So I mean, a bit worrying for the next match. If he can bring a lot of work before the next title match, I guess it's in 2016. It's going to be next year. I mean, if he can motivate himself and work a lot before this match, he's probably going to retain the title. But still, the gap is narrowing between him and the others, and I'm pretty worried if he keeps playing like that the other ones are going to catch him. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting at least. So let's go to the results of the day. And so we had the two decisive games between Nakamura, so an Aronian, and between Carlsen and Grischuk. All the other players drawn their games. On the table, you cannot see that. I didn't prepare the setup to show it to you, but we have Aronian a full point in front of Carlsen, Giri, and Grischuk, and Vachilagrav with 4 points. So we have all those guys, Carlsen, Grischuk, Giri, and Vachilagrav, a point away from Aronian. And so we have still 2 rounds to go. And on the next round, there is a little bug, but on the next round, they're going an interesting game between Carlsen and Nakamura. We know, when Hikaru Nakamura, we know that Carlsen has extremely good results against Nakamura, so it's a chance to bounce back for him. Let's see if he can seize it. So see you tomorrow from some great action. And myself, I hope that Levon is going to win the tournament, because I'm very happy to see him back. It's a player I loved. We lost him for some times, and I'm very happy if we find him. If we find him again at the top of his game. Thank you for watching this video. Have a nice day. Bye.